Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture in the Git and GitHub Masterclass. My name is Dr. Raj Dandekar. I graduated from IIT Madras with a BTech in Mechanical Engineering in the year 2017, and then I went to the MIT in the US to pursue my PhD. I finished my PhD in the year 2022 in the field of machine learning. I'll be your instructor for this part of the course where we'll have a number of lectures on Git, how to use Git, and how Git can completely transform your life. The way I was introduced to Git is a very interesting story. I was really very scared of Git and GitHub before. Even when I joined my PhD for the first 1 year, for the first even 2 years, I would say, I really used only Dropbox, even for code collaborations. Um, and many other project collaborations with my peers. But then I slowly started discovering Git and GitHub. And then I realized that I had made a big mistake by not understanding this tool beforehand. The problem with the way many people really learn about Git and GitHub is that they think it's very hard. They don't really understand what it means, and so they give up on it. The only thing you need to realize is that once you understand what Git and GitHub is, it really becomes your friend, and it can save you so many hours of effort. It can save you so much hours of time. It's just a brilliant tool to increase and improve your productivity. And whatever you are doing, whether you are a working professional right now or whether you are a graduate student pursuing your master's or PhD, or whether you are just a student who is working on personal projects and really wants a tool which can improve your efficiency, you really need to learn about Git and GitHub. So let's get started with today's lecture. In today's lecture, we are going to have an introductory lecture on what exactly is Git. Git and GitHub are those words where people believe that they cannot really explain what it is, but they just know how to use it. Well, in this lecture, I'm trying to provide an explanation to Git, what's the best way to think about Git so that you form an intuitive understanding of Git and you are not scared about it. We have already covered GitHub in another series of videos. So in these set of videos, we'll be covering Git. So let's get started with part one, which is today's content, and that is introduction to Git. To motivate this concept, I want to ask three questions to anyone who is watching this video. Question number one: have you ever tried to work on the same file as someone else at the same time? To put it another way, have you ever worked on a project with someone where you and those other people are working on the same document, but you are adding in your own ideas? So, have you tried to work on the same file as someone else at the same time? That's question number one. Question number two is, if you have tried working on such projects, how do you make edits to something which you had previously written? Is it through emails? Do you then send an email to your collaborators that, hey, I had sent this initial version to you, but I want to make some changes and here is the revised version? Or do you track it through Google Drive? Do you make versions on Google Drive? Just think about what is your framework for making edits on such a project. And number three, have you ever faced a situation in such a project where the document in which you are editing is accidentally edited by someone else, and then you don't know what happened? Your edits were replaced by someone else's edits, and you don't know why those changes were made. I faced this situation so many times. So let me illustrate that to you. Let's say you're working on a project collaboration on Google Drive, right? And let's say I have two other collaborators. One is Rajat and one is Shridat. So let's say we have a common goal in mind. We have to work on a research paper. And if I'm the only person who is working, I'll have my version 1, I'll have my version 2, I'll have my version 3. That's fine. I can track my own versions. But the problem is Rajat and Shridat also have their own versions, right? They also have their own changes which they are making to the project. And so for me, it becomes very difficult to keep track of what others are working on, what changes they have made, and how should I communicate to them what changes I'm working on. The only thing I can do is I can make version 1, I can make version 2, and then send them both an email that, hey guys, I've worked on this paragraph, I've worked on this paragraph, these are my changes, and if you want to edit, you can add comments on that. So it just becomes a tedious process of a huge amount of back and forth through emails, the drafts getting overwritten. It becomes very difficult to understand who has made what changes, etc. Even the history of the changes, it's very difficult to track. You can do it in Google Docs, but the problem with Google Docs is that there are then so many comments on the right hand side, it becomes difficult to do the version history. It becomes difficult to see exactly what changes someone has made, and then you have to constantly keep emailing. The comments become too much, and then it becomes difficult to see and distinguish between comments. It's just difficult to keep track, especially if you have code files. Google Docs is the worst way to interact or collaborate through code, because you need to show this is the change which I've made, why have I made this change. And even before someone makes any change, there should be a filtering mechanism, right? Maybe a change which someone is making needs to be reviewed by the rest of the team before it gets accepted. All of that just becomes very difficult through Google Drive, emailing, and Google Docs. So if you have faced either of these scenarios, like if you ever tried to work on the same file as someone else and you have found that, why isn't there a better solution for this? If you are always using Google Drive, Dropbox, Google Docs, emailing, but you think this is not very efficient for working on the same file as someone else, or working on a team project which involves code, then Git can help you, and you really really need to know what it is. Don't be afraid by this. I'm just going to explain to you what Git is, and then you will soon understand that it's not difficult as it sounds. You also might be thinking that what exactly are these three letters, right? G I T, what do they mean? What is G, what is I, and what is T? Where does this name even come from? Everything about Git is so abstract, right? Because all other things, you understand the meaning at least behind the name, you understand what they do, but Git, it just seems like a very abstract thing. So the main purpose of this lecture series is also to demystify this abstractness for you and present it to you in a very simple manner. Okay, so in a very simple terms, what Git is that it is a free and open source version control system for your code. Now, out of this sentence, you will understand that it's free, and you will probably understand it's open source. Open source meaning that you do not need to pay to use Git. You can use it for free, and the entire code for Git is available for free online. Version control system. So you might be thinking, what exactly is a version control system, right? And you don't know what a version control system means. Version control system means that, let's say a document has different versions, right? If you want to manage these versions, you need a version control manager or a version control system, right? Git is that manager. Git manages changes to a project without overwriting any part of the project. So let's say if you have a project whose version 1, you can have version 2, version 3, version 4, version 5, and these versions are very effectively managed by Git. And you do need version control, because if you don't have a good version control manager or a version control system, it becomes really difficult to keep track of changes, who has made what changes, should I approve these changes, how to communicate your changes, etc. Git is that manager. You can think of Git as that manager which manages the different versions of your project without really overwriting any part of the project. Uh, to make it more concrete, you can think of Git as a collection of notes on the most recently worked on project files. So basically, if people have worked on certain aspects of the project, Git, you can also think of Git as a note tracker. So Git maintains notes that this person changed this person added this person made this comment, this person deleted this. Remember, at when Git is doing all these notes, it is not changing the main file. It is just keeping a track of what different people have worked on. And along with this, Git also maintains a nice chronological history of what has changed. And this just is so much, it's a beautiful feature in Git. Git maintains an history of when this person made this change, when this person made this change, when this person made this change, etc. So as you are working on documents, Git manages the version of your project or the version of the document you're working on, and it also is keeping track of the changes people have made. So it is like a collection of notes. You can think of Git as that character which is taking notes in the background as different people are working on the project. And along with that, this character also maintains an history of what has changed. So you can think of Git as a version manager, number one, which I showed you in the previous slide. It's a manager of the your project version. Second, you can think of Git as a note taker, and third, you can think of Git as a historical character, like it maintains the history basically. Just so that you get an intuition. So if you think of Git in terms of the three terms: version manager, uh, note taker or note collector, and third, a maintainer of history, that is a good way to intuitively think of what Git is. And it does all of this for you so that project management becomes very easy for you. Uh, Now, okay, up till now I mentioned to you the informal definition of Git, right? And now let's come to the formal definition a bit. If you search about Git anywhere, people won't usually talk about these informal things. They just say one line. They say that Git is a distributed version control system. Now, what does this really mean? And this is where people start to lose interest in Git, because terminologies like these just seem so abstract. So when someone says that Git is a distributed version control system, what does this really mean? Let me try to explain this to you further. So you can think of Git like a shared digital diary for computer code. So let's say there is a code file, right? Let's say there is a website which needs to be developed, or you are inventing a new language, and there are multiple people working on this. Git allows many people to write in that diary while keeping a record of all the changes which are being made. That's why it's called distributed version control system. Every person can have their own version, every person can make their own changes, and Git keeps a record of what everyone is working on. There is a main document which is the latest version, and everyone can work on their own changes. So Git manages that main document, what different people are working on, and then it also manages which changes which people are working on should reflect in the main document. So you can think of Git as a shared digital diary. So let's say six people are working on a code. There is a shared digital diary among these six people. Number of people can work on their own version, and that main version will not get overwritten. So you can make your changes without affecting that main version. So that's fine. You don't need to worry about overwriting. So Git allows many people to write in this digital diary while keeping a record of the changes which are made. And that's why it's called as distributed version control system. Why version control? Because we saw about it before. You can keep track of the different versions your project or document is going through. And why distributed? Because let's say 15 people are working on the project. All 15 can maintain their own versions of the code in a distributed manner and then interact with the main version, which is the final document or the current version of the document. That's why Git is called as the distributed version control system. So here I have mentioned this once more. Git lets multiple users track changes in source code during software development, and it maintains a history of code changes. So let's say, as I mentioned, if 100 people are working on software development, Git tracks changes in the code, and it also maintains a history of what change someone has made. Let me actually show you an example. You don't need to really understand this fully right now, but this is a GitHub repository. By repository, I mean a collection of the code for the Julia language. So Julia is a new, extremely modern and powerful language, and it's an open source language, which means the entire code base for Julia is available for free, right? And this is a GitHub repository. And how do people work on this language? Or I think if you see here, look at the contributors. Over 1500 people have worked on the Julia language. Now, without Git, without GitHub, how do these people communicate? Do you maintain a Google Doc for 1500 people? Do 1500 people email each other? The beauty of Git and GitHub is that it lets 1500 people work on code files. And as I mentioned to you, it tracks the changes, right? Let me show you where these changes are tracked. No need for you to understand this right now, but here there is a user named mkitti, and they have made some change in the code. So if you look at file changed, you can clearly see the changes which this person has made. So they have made these changes which are right now in the green color. So the code which has stayed the same is in the white color, and the changes which this person has made are in the green color. Similarly, so many other people are trying to make changes in the code. You can check any one person right now. Let's check this person, and let's look at the file change. So they are trying to make changes in the main code base, but it is not overwriting the main file unless someone approves this code, right? So git, so this is a practical example of how 1500 people, so here see 1500 people are essentially working on this software, uh, this Julia coding language, and 1500 people are communicating, they're trying to make edits, etc. And git is that manager, it's the version control system, it's a note taker, and it also maintains the history uh, of the changes. So see, here you can look at the code files and you can see the latest change. So this change in this file was made 6 months ago. In this file history.md, the change was made 2 weeks ago, etc. So that's how it maintains a history of what all has changed. Now, based on this practical example, I think you will appreciate this sentence more. Git lets multiple users track changes in source code during software development. So, when the Julia language was being developed, it cannot be developed by one person. You need an army of people, maybe 100, 500 people were the initial developers, and they all need to collaborate. So, Git lets all these users track changes in the source code during software development, and it also maintains a history of code changes, who changed what. This ensures traceability when writing large code. And Git is not necessarily only meant for code files. You can even add documents through Git, Word documents, etc. Okay, so up till now, I hope you all have understood the informal definition of Git. If someone asks you what Git is, you can say that, well, it's a manager who manages the version of my project. If I'm collaborating with other people, it's also a note taker, and it's also a maintainer of history of the project. If someone asks you for a formal definition, you can say that Git is a distributed version control system, which means that it's essentially like a digital diary, a shared digital diary between the collaborators, and all of us can work together without overwriting the main file. And Git actually allows multiple users to track changes in the source code during software development, maintaining a history of these code changes. If you forget any of these definitions, just remember this practical example which I've showed you. Look at this. This you won't forget. The number of contributors here, 1508 contributors on the Julia programming language. It's impossible for these many people to work together without a version control system and without a very efficient version control system like Git and GitHub. Okay. So now let us come to the next part, which is an interesting part, and that is the history of Git. When was this really developed? When was this version control system developed, and who developed Git? So, Git was created for use in the development of the Linux kernel by Linus Torvalds. Let's look a bit on Wikipedia about Linus Torvalds. So, you'll see that this person is attributed to the creation of Git. Uh, they also actually invented, or one of the pioneers in inventing, the operating system Linux, and that's why it's called Linux kernel. So it was, Git was initially created for use in the development of the Linux kernel, which was the Linux operating system by Linus Torvalds. And you can even go to the Wikipedia article of this person, and here it's written, see, is the software engineer who is the creator and lead developer of the Linux kernel, Linux operating system. He also created the distributed version control system Git. Awesome. Now let's see a bit more about the history of Git. So this person who invented this version control, distributed version control system Git, which is the best tool for management of projects and management of code, writes this about management, about people management. I am a very lazy person who likes to get credit for things other people actually do. I am not a good programmer, I am a good manager. So this person says that they are not a good programmer. I don't believe it, because they are the lead developers of the Linux kernel as well as Git, and they say they are a good manager. That I believe, because Git is an amazing manager of projects. Uh, well, so this is the history behind Git and the person who invented Git. Now, when Linus invented Git, he wanted to create a tool that had three things. First, unlike other systems where a central repository was required, Git was distributed, which means different people can have their own versions on their own laptops and work independently. Second, the new tool would incorporate as many features and workflows as BitKeeper. So you would be thinking, what is BitKeeper? You can think of as BitKeeper as a rival to Git. So Git was invented to be better than BitKeeper. So let's see a bit about BitKeeper. It's a discontinued software tool. So this was also used for distributed control of computer source code. So Linus wanted to have something which is better than BitKeeper. That's number two. And number three, Linus wanted a tool which would ensure the integrity of source code and protect against corruption. So if someone accidentally overwrites files or if there is a data leakage, all of this should be prevented. So he wanted to invent Git for three reasons. First, he wanted a distributed system. People can work on their own copies, and a central copy will still be there, but people can work on their local copies without affecting the main copy. Number one. Number two, he wanted to incorporate many features and he wanted to make it better than the current state of the art, which was BitKeeper. Now BitKeeper is discontinued, and I think Git is used 95% or even more adoption. And finally, the main reason for creation of Git was that he wanted to ensure privacy. He wanted to ensure the integrity of the source code and protect against any corruption, accidental, or any malicious overwriting of code files, which can be hugely damaging for software creation. Now, here is a story about the development of Git. So, after a few days of work, Linus Torvalds had a working prototype of Git, and less than a month later, Git was managing the Linux kernel source code. Awesome, right? Within 1 month, Linus got it up and running, and it was managing the Linux source code. And this is what Linus wrote. So I'd like to stress that while it really came together in just about 10 days or so, it wasn't like it was some kind of mad dash of coding. The actual amount of that early code is actually fairly small. It all depended on getting the basic ideas right. Again, here simplicity was the key, and I also believe that the more simpler the things are, the better they are. So look at the adoption of Git right now. It's simple, it's efficient, and so many people are using it to manage their source code. So the Julia programming language, I worked at the Julia lab, and the Julia programming language founders, they extensively collaborate and still collaborate through GitHub. I showed you the repository for that. So it's good to see that Linux source code was the first source code to be managed through Git. You all must be thinking I'm using Git and GitHub, right? They are different terms. And in another part of the series, we are covering GitHub also. But in this part, the lectures which I'll be covering, they will be predominantly targeted towards Git. Now, April 7, 2005 was a historic day because Linus Torvalds made the first ever commit to Git. If you don't know what a commit is, it's totally fine. No need to panic. But this was the day when Git was, you can think of as officially launched. So Git, Linus made a simple change. He just added some kind of a README file. So here you can see April 2005. This was the one of the first commits or changes made to the Git code base. No need to understand what commit means right now, but around April 7 or April 8, 2005 was when Git was officially launched, and it's been 19 years and it's still very widely used. So there are even Reddit threads on 10 years since the initial commit of Git from Linus Torvalds. So this Reddit post was put 9 years ago. You can also search a bit more about this. So 2005, and we are right now in 2024 when I'm recording this lecture. So almost 20 years in, and Git just becomes more popular, and its popularity just keeps on growing. Now you might be thinking, why Git? So in the last part of this lecture, let me cover the bit of history. It seems pretty random, right? Like it's not really get, it's not got, but what is Git? So when asked in an email about why did you come up with this name, so Linus told the name Git was given when he wrote the very first version. He described the tool as the stupid content tracker and the name as a random three letter combination that is pronounceable and not actually used by any common Unix command. So he just wanted to create a random three letter word which is pronounceable and not currently in use by uh, the Unix command. So he just wanted a new word which is a bit random and it's three letter and it's easily pronounceable. That's why he came up with the name Git. Uh, now, well, Git is also British slang for a silly or contemptible person. So let's go to Google and ask Git in British slang. So if you search this, you will see a foolish or worthless person. Now, this sounds a bit silly, right? Even disrespectful a bit. But it's also another testament to Linus' personality and the informal community-driven spirit of open source software. So when you interact with open source software, people are very open, people are very honest. So this name again is kind of a testament to the informal nature of open source software. So I like to believe that Git is a random three-letter word and it's just easily pronounceable. There is no real meaning, but it's good to know that it's also British slang for a silly person, and that's a testament to the informal nature of open source software. That brings us to the end of this lecture, in which we essentially covered two things. We covered about the informal definition of Git. Then we covered the formal definition of Git being a distributed version control system. And we also saw the Julia programming language, where around, I think, 1500 people have collaborated on this project. Without Git, it would have been impossible for this code collaboration. And we saw that Git is primarily three things. Git is a manager of your code. It manages the versions of your code. Git is also a note taker. It takes notes on what people have worked on. And third, Git also maintains an history of who has added what or who has made which changes. I also showed you where this is. So if you go to this pull request tab, you can see what changes people are making. You can click on this files changed and see what all changes people are making in the code. And you can even see the day when this has been changed. That's pretty awesome, right? Here you can see when some code is actually changed in the main source code. You can see this was changed around 19 hours ago. Something in this folder was changed 19 hours ago. Something in this folder was changed 2 weeks ago. Something in this folder was changed 4 days ago. And you can also see what actually changed. Someone fixed unterminated strings in bolt make files. No need to understand what this is, but in one view, I can see when different things were changed and who changed these things and what was changed. So Git is essentially a version manager, a note taker, and also a history maintainer. That's one good way to think about it. And it's a distributed version control system. It's not centralized. Different people can work on code on their local machines, and there will be one central repository where the main source code is stored. So we also looked at the history of Git. It was created for use in development by Linus Torvalds, who also created the Linux kernel. And Linus actually created a tool for three purposes. First, to make it distributed. Second, to make it better than Bitkeeper, which was state of the art at that time. Now it's discontinued. And third, to make it secure, to prevent any data leakage or to have good privacy. The first ever commit to Git, or the first ever time when Git was really launched publicly, was April 2005, which is about 20 years before. And now it's been 20 years since then, and still the popularity of Git just keeps increasing and growing. I highly encourage all of you to use Git, which we'll be covering in the subsequent lectures. How to use Git, all of these will be told to you, but just keep an open mind with respect to Git, because it might just change your life as it did mine. Regarding the where the name Git comes from, I think it's just a random three-letter combination. It also is a British slang for a silly person, which is a testament to the informal community-driven spirit of open source software. In the next lecture, we will cover this part. How does Git exactly enable version control? We'll look at this in detail, and we'll also be taking a few practical examples. So thanks a lot everyone for watching this lecture. Please leave a note in the comments, or um, let me know what you think about this lecture. And I hope you learned a lot about Git. Thanks everyone. I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.